Travis Reier, the BamaOnline.com staff from Coleman Coliseum. Just a few moments after the media observation period at Monday's practice at Thomas Drew Practice Fields, the Crimson Tide returns to work after having the Easter weekend off. Alabama in full pads out there this afternoon on an absolutely perfect mid to late March afternoon on the University of Alabama campus. So Crimson Tide getting back after it and spend some time with the quarterbacks and wide receivers, sort of the DBs, get to that one corner of the practice field where we can go out. You can get kind of up close and personal with the quarterbacks and wide receivers. And I wouldn't say it was the most crisp of starts for that group. Kind of was a Monday in some ways, still a good-looking collection of skill guys when you look at those quarterbacks and those wide receivers, and some interesting work that they did under Lane Kiffin's watchful eye this afternoon. Did some red zone type work, some inside the 10 sort of drills where you work on some of the quick skinnies, the seam routes, fades, things like that. You really get a good look at the athleticism of some of these receivers, especially Robert Foster. We talked about him a lot, but a guy that this afternoon showed you once again that he can really go up and get the football. Just a tremendous athlete, and some very nice throws from some different quarterbacks. We saw in some different orders that they were working in. Not a lot to take away from it. Cooper Bateman, as you might expect, the most experienced guy of the group up front, but we saw Cornwell, we saw Barnett, and we saw the true freshman Jalen Hurts, and again, more about getting a good look at the overall athleticism that these guys bring to the table, and some pretty good hands. Had a few drops out there today, maybe more than what we've seen in individual drills at other points of the early portion of spring drills, but for the most part, another impressive showing from those guys. And being in that area, watching the defensive backs, pretty much what we've seen so far. A lot of guys in competition for some of those corner and safety positions. Obviously, Marlon Humphrey comes back as a 15-game starter at corner for Alabama, but Minkah Fitzpatrick, a guy that played a lot of football last season as a nickelback and looking to be the starter opposite Humphrey in that defense. But third corner spot, Kendall Sheffield looks to have made some really nice strides physically. Seeing him up close today has gotten closer to where he needs to be, I think, in terms of strength and overall size. And a couple of veterans there I wouldn't count out either. Anthony Averett, a guy that's been around a while now, knows what's expected of him, understands the defense, needed to make some strides of his own physically, looks to have made some more of those, is closer to what they like. Typically they like those corners right around 190 pounds or so. And he looks to be at least closer to that. Not sure what he's listed at right now, but the same for Sheffield in terms of taking that redshirt year as well. And Tony Brown out there. And when you talk about guys who look NFL ready, we all know that with Tony Brown. It's not the physical aspect that we're trying to still evaluate with number 7. That is very much in place. So a good group out there in the secondary at safety. Ronnie Harrison is a guy who's filled out up top too. Looks like he's added some strength and bulk to the upper body. Another guy who's going into his second year in the program. Looks like he's already been here 3 or 4. So physically, some guys that are ready to go right now. Got to figure out some other things at safety, as we've talked about with Eddie Jackson out. Still seeing Lawrence Hootie Jones in there. Still seeing Maurice Smith, a veteran, at the safety spot. Sean Burgess-Becker, a second-year player, working back there as well. Another second-year guy, and Deontay Thompson still working with those safeties. So pretty much status quo in the secondary. Defensive line depth, something that we probably need to touch on more. We've talked about the frontline guys that Alabama brings back, and no doubt a lot of production, even with A'Shawn Robinson and Jaron Reed moving on. But big springs coming up for Josh Frazier and also O.J. Smith, a couple of guys who didn't play a lot of football last year, especially Smith. Frazier's a guy that can help him at a couple of different spots. Really needs to come on, and it's interesting with depth, because whereas we saw last year they had so much depth, guys like Johnny Dwight, Dakota Ball, We saw them move over to offense and work at H-back, tight end, those type of spots. Now it looks like they're coming back to defense because numbers are needed, at least right now, until a couple of guys get here in the summer. But Johnny DeWhite back with those defensive linemen. Dakota Ball, it looks like, could be a guy that could be back with that defensive line coming off of a little bit of an injury in the offseason. So those are guys to keep an eye on in terms of depth as we move forward. They've got 4 guys I think they feel really, really good about, but obviously need 6, 7, 8 to do what you need to do over the course of a season. Offensive line depth kind of similar, although there's plenty of numbers there. 15 scholarship linemen, as we've talked about. Interesting to see the breakdown at guard right now. Got some veterans in there. Bradley Bozeman getting a lot of work at left guard, with Ross Pierce-Baker working at center. Also Alphonse Taylor obviously back after starting every game a year ago. But some young guys that look to be positioning themselves maybe as pretty strong depth providers, if nothing else. And Brandon Kennedy at right guard, and also Dallas Warmack at the left guard position. And you've got versatile guys like Lester Cotton that can play a couple different spots. Lester today was back at left tackle with Corin Curvin at right tackle, so kind of returned to what we saw at the very start of spring drills during Monday's practice. So depth, a big part of what you try to get accomplished during spring practice. Obviously some position battles across the board in terms of starting spots. But you got to develop that next 20 or 30 guys on your roster. We've heard Saban talk about it many times. How good is your 40th player on the roster? Everybody's 10th to 15th guy is pretty good. How good is that 40th guy that you have on that 85-man scholarship roster? That's where a lot of things get determined, and that's what I think they're still trying to figure out at a number of positions. Now, Nick Saban will address the media following tonight's practice, this afternoon's practice. So you'll want to keep it right here on Bama Online. We'll have the live thread on the roundtable with Saban's comments, as we always do. The Crimson Tide will practice again on Wednesday. Of course, a big scrimmage coming up Saturday, the first of spring drills. They go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday this week, with the scrimmage taking place at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And again, from an injury standpoint, team looked to be in pretty good shape. Keith Holcomb, the linebacker, in watching baseball this weekend, noticed that he was in a boot on that right foot. Didn't play in any of the baseball games this weekend for the Crimson Tide over on the diamond at the Joe, but he was on the practice field today and moving around with those inside linebackers. Speaking of which, still pretty much the same there too, with Rashawn Evans, Josh McMillan, a couple of outside linebackers previously working with the inside linebackers, and Jeremy Pruitt. So good to see Holcomb out there at least able to do something with those linebackers. But again, Crimson Tide returns to work on Wednesday. We'll have coverage throughout the week, as we always do, right here on 247sports.com and BamaOnline.com. Some recruiting news probably going to come out of this workout too. I'll just put it that way. There were some prospects of note, including one player from the state of Louisiana who projects almost as a consensus, if not unanimous, top 2 or 3 prospect in the country. So you'll want to follow that part of it too from a recruiting standpoint. Every day it seems like there are visitors out the yin-yang, I guess you could say, on the practice field at Alabama football practices. So keep your ears and eyes open for that news as well. So we'll join you again on Wednesday following the media observation period. And as always, remind you to keep it right here on BamaOnline.com for more coverage of Crimson Tide athletics.